There's something about the combination of Sandro Tonali and Newcastle which kind of makes sense. I will explain why in this video. Welcome back to the Laurence McKenna channel, guys. It's good to have you. It is going to be a massive summer of Premier League transfers, probably money-wise, but also in terms of huge names entering the league. And Sandro Tonali, the 23-year-old from Lodi, just outside Milan, and therefore close enough to Milan to be sort of his local, if you want. I mean, if I do this, look, if I zoom out, that's Lodi. That's Milan. If we go a little bit down the road, there's Brescia, there's Bergamo. They could have gone to Bergamo, but he started out at Brescia. Does anyone else want to tell me why this looks like some sort of Australian league team? It ain't though, but they are kind of, in locality to Milan, fairly close, and therefore not a feeder team, but it's a good team to go to if you want to end up in Milan in the end. Of course, he went from Brescia to AC Milan for 23 million just a couple of seasons ago, and since then, things have looked pretty good for Shaboy. Mainly because since then, he's won the league. Obviously, Napoli last season won it. The season before that, though, there's Milan. They won it so late on as well, but they did win it by a convincing margin over the likes of Juventus in the end. The two other teams just behind them have also since improved, and there's a possibility that a lot of people are assessing those other two sides, because guess what? A lot of people are beginning to see that there is value in what the, at least Serie A, top of Serie A, is doing. Maybe people are beginning to see that it's not exactly the slow, even though it is a bit slower than the Premier League, it's not exactly the boring league that some people like to characterise it as. And therefore, some of the players that come from there, say fourth place Milan, who are only 20 points off the top. I say only, that's quite a distance, but they're also selling the best players. Milan put quite a good run together later in the season, made that top four. Who else made the top four later on in that season? That's right, guys. Newcastle. Newcastle made the top four, quite convincingly in the end as well. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about £70 million up from the 23 million that was spent on him not so long ago. Is he worth that? Well, Dan Ashworth, who is now, of course, the director of football at Newcastle United, would have you believe so. And this guy is the guy who built up, and I mean built up, so much of the coffers of what is now at Brighton, right? This guy is a lethal, I would imagine, combination with the owners of Newcastle United. And he is somewhat playing Pro Evolution Soccer 6. Some of you will remember Pro Evo as one of the greatest football games of all time, but one of the games where you had to put your team together. I mean, you could say it's like, FIFA, but the whole point was that with PES, you were kind of putting together this team of like relative unknowns. That's at least what I did on PES anyway. Already he's done that in the off-season. Minter. Anyway, they signed Minter. He goes straight back out on loan to Feyenoord, but they're already building up this little bank of talent. And these little banks of talent will be the kind of thing that build Newcastle away from this previous model of Mike Ashley. The previous model of Mike Ashley, by the way, which delivered this kind of midfield. Let me just zoom in a little bit there. Here's Mike Ashley for anyone who'd forgotten. Mike Ashley there. Billionaire. Anyway, Mike Ashley had built up a relatively poor midfield stock, right? And that's why Newcastle massively need to improve in that area. Bruno Guimaraes has come in. Obviously, Joe Linton was signed towards the end of the Mike Ashley era. Joe Willock was also someone who was kind of bought in that period as well. And then the Longstaff brothers came through in that time too. Do you want to look at the other people in this midfield? I mean, you do, in the sense that you need to know who Newcastle need to replace and upgrade in Ryan Fraser, in Elliot Anderson, probably even one of the Longstaff brothers, probably Jeff Hendrick, who is currently playing as the number 8. Might lose that number fairly soon. Anyway, the point is, if I put over this AC Milan side playing Juve, right? This is where Tonali played. And roughly where Guimaraes plays, you know what I'm saying? You get quite a nice crossover between the two players. Not that I'm saying he's a direct like-for-like replacement for Guimaraes, to another very young, very talented player. People seem to think Guimaraes is like 30 or something. The guy is 25. He's still so young, so promising, so brilliant, but he needs a better midfield around him, and he needs players who can enable him to do more. Now, that doesn't mean that Tonali is coming in to, basically sit there and let Guimaraes do whatever he wants. Tonali is not that kind of player, and he's not the kind of player to dictate the pace of a game. In fact, Guimaraes is probably a better dictator of the overall pace of the game than Tonali is. In fact, Newcastle at times last season struggled to dictate the pace of the game against some of the top sides. And there were times where you think, okay, they had these kind of, Eddie Howe moments where they were punching up, and that's fantastic. But the times when they really needed to get on the front foot against the opposition for sustained periods, get back into the game, get a foot on the ball higher up the field, did they always have the facility to do that? Outside of Guimaraes, probably maybe Joe Linton and a couple of tough tacklers. They need someone who's physical, and they also need someone who's able to press. In step Tonali. I circled these three forwards, by the way, mainly because all three of them are good at carrying the ball. That will be important to us later. Here's Mike Ashley partying because Newcastle United made the Champions League. Making the Champions League this season is so key to Newcastle United and why they can unlock these levels of cash. Previously, they obviously hadn't spent a lot under Mike Ashley. And in fact, while every other club was growing in terms of overall revenue, how much they were generating, Newcastle pretty much remained static at the time. Obviously, the new owners coming in want to change that. And needing to do that basically means you have to bring in an expert like Mr. Ashworth here. Ashworth is the kind of guy that you would want on your side if you were trying to build a good football side, a good footballing team. And that is why they're currently looking all over Italy for another Italian to follow in the footsteps of Alessandro Pastone. Anyway, he played for Newcastle, didn't have a particularly incredible era there, but he was he was a memorable Italian. Then obviously Giuseppe Rossi. Everyone remembers Rossi. Everyone remembers that loan from Manchester United. Everyone remembers that in the end he ended up going to the States. Everyone remembers he's probably one of the biggest potential players of a US generation there that never quite made it, right? But ultimately the streets will remember Giuseppe Rossi. Anyway, down here I've kind of profiled a couple of other Italians that some people say is like, kind of select these middle three, Verratti, Pirlo, Jorginho. None of those three are what we're looking at here. We're looking at, the two players he's been compared to in his youth, which he is still in, is Gattuso, and a fantastic number 8, and Rossi. A 6 come 8 come sits there a little bit deeper. What is it that we're kind of doing here? Two guys who are incredibly aggressive, incredibly good at winning the ball back, tone setters within the midfield, leaders within the midfield, a guy that you can rely on in terms of personality, and obviously he's got Pirlo's hair. This guy, like I said, is a gen of Pro Evolution Soccer 6. His two greatest attributes? Did you ask? No. Power and physicality. At least up until this point in his career. Maybe Eddie Howe's coaching will give you something else. He's also someone who covers an incredible amount of space, an incredible amount of grass, shall we say, in not only Serie A, but also the Champions League. Hence why in Serie A, this is his heat map from this season. Interesting. Obviously, he's taken both the corners in there, but also that's fairly speckled. Like normally we see quite a concentrated area, every other player that we've profiled, but this is like really varied, should we say? Same in the Champions League, so it's not as if it's just within Serie A. Like this guy who's been fairly key to Milan for quite a while. We can talk about the amount while we're doing that. He's been fairly key to Milan for a while. He is not necessarily Milan born and bred, but being in that surrounding area, coming from that region, you're always going to be looking towards AC Milan or Inter Milan. You're always going to be looking at being one of those boys. And actually a couple of years ago when a couple of Premier League sides were interested in him, he said he wanted to stay at AC because of what he wanted to achieve there. Maybe he had a vision, maybe he saw something was coming, but ultimately they worked him into a position where he is one of their key players, right? He supplies the ball out to Leao. Obviously, he's been alongside Benacer for quite a while there as well. He's a very key part of what Milan tried to do. But they've always been a side, in recent years at least, who don't dominate possession, who are doing the counter-attacking, who are a bit more reactive, should we say, to the opposition. And that is why Tonali might be an interesting buy for Newcastle United. This, by the way, doesn't mean that you always sit back. Press was a huge part of what has been going on for AC Milan over the last few years. And what it has been doing through Tonali is to press. There are a lot of great examples of this, not only within the Champions League, but also within Serie A, where he wins the ball back, gets it downfield to a Leao or to a Giroud or to any of the attackers and distributes. I'll tell you why that's important in a second. Interceptions also key within this. Not only that, but carries also key within this. These are two very different attributes, by the way. The interceptions probably come from the fact that he's covering so much of the field. He's reading the play really well. We also profiled Declan Rice a couple of days ago, and we were talking about how important it is that he reads the play, how important it is that he can cover space and know where the ball's going to go before it's making it there. I know that's sounds like something which, a lot of players should probably know, But these are the kind of things that you'd imagine you pay a premium for, especially in the likes of Declan Rice, especially in the likes of Tonali. Two young, hungry leaders who are going to be part of a big part of their international setup, but have also been huge in terms of A, winning the league or winning a trophy in Declan Rice's case, and B, also just in terms of what people say about them who are around. So interceptions and pressing, a huge part of that. Eddie Howe, a huge interceptor, a huge presser, would love for his side to be on the front foot even more, but would also love to be able to open up the play and have someone who's adaptable enough and reads the game well enough to know where they need to be. Of course, carrying is a huge part of anyone's game if they play deeper, right? Anyone is going to need a player who brings the ball forward. Obviously, Declan Rice also does that. I'm not going for a direct comparison here, but you get what I'm saying. This is a guy who can win the ball back and carry it forward, release the pass at the right time, get the wingers away, or at least get your strikers away. Alexander Isak, Alan St-Maximin, Miguel Almiron, Callum Wilson, Gordon, Jacob Murphy, all people who could play off a Leao, who could be cutting in from the wing. Isak might be doing that. Could he profile similar to Rafael Leao? Possibly, though not so far. They played him a little bit more kind of centrally / on the right, but it's nice to see that he could play in a similar vein, should we say, to that. Alan St-Maximin, obviously one of those adventurous wingers that you'd love to see play alongside a midfielder who can unlock him and also be making runs while someone like, Sandro is getting forward. Miguel Almiron, I'll be interested to see how they play him if they continue to keep him at the club. He might be one of those players that you could sell on for a fairly decent fee, stay within FFP rules, and basically just, keep on the right side of the law. Callum Wilson, striker. They need someone else who can be an incredible striker. I think they kind of saw Isak as that. They need to spread the goals out is what I'm saying. But Callum Wilson is a great holder of the ball as well. He's led the line really well for Newcastle. And when he wasn't injured, I think he actually was a really key part of the way they play. Could he be their Giroud type character? And then finally, Gordon, obviously huge fee spent on him. No one questioned that at the time. I mean, it was a lot of money for a player that profiled not mid, but sort of profiled relatively weirdly, and obviously is someone who passes the eye test, but is also someone who, again, seems adaptable in an Eddie Howe type system. I'm not even going on to Murphy. Let's talk about his passing just for a second, because the passing aspect of the game I think is really important here. If you're going to have a player in the midfield who's not a 6, then as an 8, they need to be able to spread the ball around, short passing. He's very good at short passing, but he's also ambitious with some of his longer passes. Now, sometimes those get intercepted, and I think a lot of people will focus on those interceptions and say that Eddie Howe needs to coach his intercepted balls up. That's probably going to be the case, right? Especially if you have two great wingers that are playing off you. They will get intercepted less and less and less because the wingers know where to be. AC Milan have already had that, but you get that in the Champions League this season, he was able to start quite a few counter-attacks, carry the ball and distribute not only at short distance, but also longer passes, lofted passes that made out to the wing. You can see an Alan St-Maximin getting on the end of that. You can see an Isak getting on the other end of that. It's going to be interesting to see where they play him. But his short passing, his side-to-side passing, and his control going back towards the defenders, back towards the goalkeeper, really key. Possibly he won't play that deep for Newcastle, but I'd be interested to see. We can go through that in just a second. Of course, to possess the ball has not been something that he's been used to in recent years. Obviously, you play with possession, but he's never been really part of a side that play as a possessive team. Brescia, obviously counter-attacking a lot of the time, and actually in the season that he was there, in the 1920 season, he played in a position, he basically played in a side that profiled as someone who didn't keep the ball and gave it to the opposition. Feels pretty typical Italian, maybe not when you get to the national side who want to possess the ball with Mancini. AC Milan obviously similarly counter-attacking or not so much in possession, allowing you to bring them on, and then they've got lots of people they can hit you with on the counter-attack. Italy might be one of the first sides that you would say, put them in a position where, hey, we're going to need you to possess it a little bit more. And that's possibly why he's been in and out of the side. They've got some people who are very strong in possession. But for that very reason, it's why you would probably profile him as an 8 and not necessarily a 6 that's going to play alongside Bruno Guimaraes, right? I think that's where he's going to play. Most people profile him as being strongest on the left side of that. So maybe Tonali swaps over with a Joe Linton like this. Maybe he's more like there and Joe Linton's a little bit deeper. Maybe. But Bruno will still sit relatively deep. I actually still think they have 2 big signings they need to make this summer. Possibly 3, but mainly 2. Someone else to back up Wilson and someone else who can go into midfield and enable Bruno to go further forward and possibly just another name to go back here. Tonali's not going to play deep and dictate like this unless he has a huge shift. And it could be a big shift for him. But what he will bring to the side, and what I do think is important to acknowledge with someone like Tonali, is he brings width really, really well in these sides. You saw from look at these heat maps, right? Look how much width there is in that. Look at that, right? Come back here. Who wants width? Kieran Trippier. Dan Burma's getting forward more towards the end of the season. Wingers definitely appreciate it because they love that you are taking up part of the position. They love that you're taking up them, basically giving them a bit more space, giving them a 1-2, something to play off. But also, they love that if you can go wide, which is, by the way, what Tonali has done out here and also over here, then they can play on the inside of that. Isak's going to love that. Not the first player to do that. And what's interesting about it here is, right, I know I keep going back to Liverpool and people are going to get a bit bored of that, but Tonali is going to be like, he could be kind of I'm going to put this in the right way, a Jordan Henderson type within the team, right? I'm not saying, he's probably technically, Jordan Henderson is an extremely technically proficient player who got around the pitch really well. The very apex for Jordan Henderson was a presser who won the ball back and then empowered the two wingers around him, basically passing the ball out to, guess what? A right wing back who profiled very similar to Kieran Trippier and a winger who wanted to get inside and score goals. What did that mean that they did? They rotated a lot out there, and very often it gave Trent in this case, but in this case Kieran Trippier the overlapping or the underlapping run, or allowed him to slip inside. How dangerous could he be from that position? Isak then slipping inside, possibly becoming a striker if you don't want to play Callum Wilson at all. But then also, if you put Tonali on this side, you've got Isak there, you've got Kieran Trippier there, Bruno Guimaraes and Joe Linton. Tonali could play in this, like, I don't think he's a 10. I actually think you'd have to slip someone more inside here, like kind of more like that, and then you put these two more like that. That's a very dominant position to find them in. It's not really one you're going to see very commonly in the Premier League, but you will be able to make a box with someone like Tonali. Who you do that with? Possibly Wilson if Wilson drops back a little bit, but you get what I'm saying. Like there is an element of needing to possess the ball here, and especially if we were to move, say, Alan St-Maximin, I'm just going to drop another name on there, Madders. Let's do that. Make the sub. If you bring Tonali there and you put Madders on the inside, not only are you enabling Dan Burn, or if they sign another fullback, someone there, you're also then pushing a Tonali a little further on to, guess what, be able to score goals from the edge of the box and get onto the end of plays, which is, guess what, something else he really loves to do. But you're also allowing an Isak to get a little bit wider, put a cross in, someone can get on the end of that. You've got two players who profile really well there. And again, this season, the top teams that we're seeing who are signing, Liverpool looking to sign a McAllister, that you've got Rice, who is an incredibly adaptable player in there in the first place. Everyone wanted Bellingham because he was so adaptable. Everyone wants to sign midfielders who are adaptable. We're seeing the end of someone like a Gundogan who had such a good run in the Premier League because he was so adaptable. What Newcastle are building here is an adaptable midfield again. These rotations that you see out wide could begin to become rotations that you see more regularly in the midfield now. Midfield's just rotating around, especially as wingers become more adaptable players. And when you've got someone like Sven Botman at the back, who's a genuine world-class talent as a centre-back, or at least on the edge of that, you've got Fabian Schär alongside him, a very solid centre-back. What you've got there is a team that is able to distribute in a number of different ways, and you've got players who can run onto the end of that. Think of it this way. Newcastle's limited midfield this season, not that I'm being mean to any of these guys, but the limited midfield that they had, look at this, all went through Guimaraes, and it had to go through him, right? Because he was so technically brilliant. If you want to go through Joe Linton, sure, I also think that's great, but he kind of, there is an interesting dynamic between those two, obviously both Brazilian, obviously both really technically good, and have found their wings underneath someone like Eddie Howe. Joe Willock, I mean, if you're Joe, you really think you're going to get minutes in this side here? Possibly, but if Maddison comes in, probably not, to be honest. And again, you've got a couple of players in there that, I mean, look in that midfield, the players they've signed more recently, you're not going to sell many of those. In fact, you're going to be relying a lot more on your Botmans, on your Bruno Guimaraes, on your Isaks over the next few years, because those are players that you think to yourself, right, we're going to build around you. Could you, and Anthony Gordon as well, obviously, but would you build around Anthony Gordon in terms of tactics? Maybe not necessarily, but you want him to be really solid, basically starter in the side. But if you've got Miguel Almiron, if you've got Jacob Murphy, if you've got even a Joe Willock or one of the Longstaff brothers or even a Jeff Hendrick. Put together a 40 million package for all of those guys, which I think, by the way, is perfectly possible. A 40 million package to sell all of those. Miguel Almiron could go for a minimum of 10. Joe Willock could go for a minimum of 15, 20, though they probably see some promise in him. Joe Hendrick, sell into the Championship, get someone else in, put a swap deal out there. One of the Longstaff brothers. Overall, you're looking at about 30 to 40 million pound package, which gives you so much more money over the long term, clears the wage bill, you're bringing in world-class players, and let's face it, if they don't get rid of these guys, they've got some pretty decent backup that can try and do an impression of what it is that Tonali would do in this side. But broadly, as it stands right now, you can see where these rotations are happening, right? You can see where Maddison would be. You can see where Joe Linton would be with that. Would Joe Linton drop a little bit deeper? Would you allow Bruno Guimaraes and Joe Linton to be one of the two wandering players in here? Or would you rather Tonali came a little bit deeper, say more like there? I mean, his heat map is more like that, right? But are you wasting a lot of the talent there if you're bringing all these guys like that? So you're kind of bringing in players. You could almost make a diamond, which I wouldn't be against seeing. And then you got Wilson and Isak up front with two overlapping wingers. Hello, Mr. Italy. And by the way, what I think is great about, and I'll finish on this, Tonali was praised by Mancini as someone who could play on the right and someone who could play on the left as an 8. He doesn't necessarily profile as a 6, and they're very stringent about the way that they profile their defensive midfielders in Italy. Make no mistake about it, Tonali is not necessarily your classic 6. They still need a 6, I think, which is what will probably take Joe Linton out of midfield, but Bruno maybe on the right side there, or possibly as part of a double pivot. But the point is, you've then got someone who's come in and frees up a Tonali to press, allows Madders or ASM to get a little bit further down the field, and Wilson to get right in front of goal, because Tonali can get on the end there, and then you've got two players coming inside. We're looking at a side that's looking to dominate possession. Fabian Schär goes out there, Botman in the middle, world class, and Dan Burn, as much as they've played him as a fullback, can operate as part of a back three, because of his size, probably not because of his pace, but because of his size, and also just because he'll probably naturally be staying a little bit deeper because of the lack of pace there as well, right? And I know someone's going to say, hey, but there was this one tackle this time. Yeah, Dan Burn's not going to want to get into these duels throughout the season, so let's not pretend that that is a attribute that he constantly have. I'm not saying he's not capable of recovering, but that's not the point. It's not how you're going to primarily play him. They will still line up as if they're a back four. People will still list this side as if they're playing a 4-3-3. It's a weird way of doing it in the Premier League now. You wouldn't really do that. There's ASM. But what you will do is you'll probably see them you probably see Tonali listed like that, just purely because people are used to seeing Joe Linton play there. But if you put Joe Linton, ASM, that's kind of a waste of Tonali there. I feel like it's going to be more like this. Maybe Maddison comes in a bit more like that. Maybe it's more like that. You got that as it's like a offset diamond / the box you want to make, and then you've got guys making runs off that, and obviously Trippier. The final thing I'll say is there's a huge amount of excitement around the fact that if Kieran Trippier is not on the field, or if Kieran Trippier doesn't want to take all the set pieces next season, which he was obviously exceptional at last year, Tonali is also an incredible set piece manager as well. He's also someone who's able to take free kicks as well. Obviously the set piece in terms of set plays, you see Giroud getting on the end of all those things. There's that famous Tonali free kick that loads of people love as well. I think it's just worth saying, it's not just down to the open play. Newcastle need to make them more, and I think they definitely need to make more of set pieces because of the pieces that they have there. Big pieces they can get forward for a set piece, right? Especially on corners. Make more of that with someone like Tonali, and then if not Kieran Trippier, then Tonali's coming in with his right foot on that left side. Kieran Trippier, they've just got two guys there who are very good at delivering, should we say, with their right foot. So there's an interesting amount of what is going on at Newcastle right now. I think a lot of people are seeing how adaptable managers want their teams to be. They're seeing how adaptable Joe Linton's not going to play there. They're seeing how adaptable they need to be now in the Premier League. Let's see if we can similarly profile Tonali and welcome an Italian who is so incredibly promising to the Premier League in an incredibly exciting side. You can justify I'll finish on this. You can justify a £70 million investment to Newcastle because of someone like Dan Ashworth, who brings great amounts of legitimacy to this project, but also because Newcastle need a midfielder they can rely on for the next 5, 6, 7 years, and that is arguably a Tonali, right? If Sandro Tonali can come in, he'll be a starter for Italy, he'll be someone who will massively improve under the likes of Eddie Howe and his coaches, but he'll instantly upgrade that midfield and put another body in there that is high quality, high class. These are really important factors for Newcastle right now. They need to replace some of the people who are piano carriers, and I don't even know if he's a piano player, but he's someone who can get that piano going and someone who can someone who can set the pace in the game if he's up front or a little bit further down the field, alongside a Bruno Guimaraes, alongside if they sign a world-class 6. They were looking at Barella. I'm not sure if he's going to come in anymore. I'm not even sure he's top of their list. And the fact they're willing to spend 70 million on this player, spread out over a couple of years, over the lifetime of a 6, maybe even 5, 6 year contract, it's not all that much. It works for them right now. And the point is, PES was about diverse sides and players that hadn't necessarily been seen yet, right? I always look to get one of those kind of players on my side. Tonali fits that profile perfectly. And not only that, young, Italian international, and AC Milan love him. It'll be very interesting to see whether this guy who previously didn't want to leave AC Milan is now, as they say it in their reports, not exactly batting away people's interest and is interested possibly in a move, maybe at times, because he doesn't want to upset the people around Milan. And there are other, I didn't exactly say that, but you get what I'm saying. Like, there's a guy here who's open to a move. Anyways, lovely to chat to you guys. If you have enjoyed this profile, please hit the subscribe button just down there. If you haven't, cool with me, but please do hit that subscribe button. It's really good to chat to you guys, and I'll see you in a while. Much love. Bye.